Table Talk is not your typical D&D TTRPG podcast. We are not here to run you through our whole campaign.
We're here to talk about everything else in the space of tabletop roleplay.
I'm your host, Alejandra Wilhelm.
And I'm also your host, Mariah Gresham.
And we're your tabletop roleplay girlies.
Quick PSA from post-production Mariah. This episode will center on our experience with Lines and Veils and how we maintain emotional safety while telling great stories. Content warning for brief, topical mentions of suicide and self-harm from 1:55 to 2 minutes and 50 seconds. Please feel free to skip this section if it might be triggering for you. Enjoy the show.
And we're rolling.
Ready, Freddy?
Ready, Freddy. Perfect. Well, welcome back to Table Talk. Thank you so much for enjoying our shenanigans enough, I guess, to listen to us ramble some more.
Our nonsense.
Our nonsense.
Your
our
regularly
nonsense.
scheduled nonsense.
Your regularly scheduled nonsense with your favorite tabletop roleplay girlies. So actually, I think this episode we kind of discussed, we wanted to talk a little bit about lines and veils as something that you encounter at the table. Which is something that, I got introduced to by that mutual friend that we both shared, because I don't think I had that happen in my first game that I ever played. But we've definitely had varying degrees of encounters of DMs that have never heard of lines and veils, DMs that highly encourage it, what happens when they are in use, when they're not in use.
Yeah, I think we've had different levels. I mean, we both now have policies about that being an explicit discussion.
Yeah.
That we take in our own games and games we play in and all of that.
For sure.
So,
for sure. And just in case, there's anybody listening that like many DMs I've encountered that hadn't heard about it before.
yes.
Lines and veils in the TTRPG space are like a discussion you have with your players prior to starting the game, where you discuss things that they may not want to encounter in a role play scenario, things that might be triggering, things that could be addressed, but maybe don't go into detail. So that's where lines are lines in the sand. We are not crossing.
We're not going to touch it.
Veils are, I can see it, but I do not want to interact with it too much.
Or like, it can be a topic, it can exist in the world, it can be a thing that happens, but
I don't want it to happen to me or my character.
Off screen, quote unquote.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to role play. Like, I'll allow myself and use my example. One of mine is like graphic depictions of suicide.
Yeah.
And where it's like, is that a part of life and a thing that happens to real people? Absolutely. And like, I don't need that erased necessarily, but I also don't need it to be like a central thing. I am not going to role play a suicide scene or sit through the role play of a suicide scene. Like, if it happens, off camera again, like that's okay.
Or it's like alluded to or something like that.
Yeah, it's just like, we're not going to sit here and have like a 13 Reasons Why moment where we go like step by step detailed through it. And I won't even get on that soapbox because I'm a psych major with depression. And I'm not going to go there. And why that's problematic.
For sure.
But,
so it's something that's like, in my opinion, deeply, deeply important and fundamental when you start playing in these spaces. And when you maybe have never played before, it's hard to imagine why that might be necessary.
It's a bit of a weird thing, I feel like. And because I've thought about it as we've like with the new campaign when we present, and like the new DM and the new player who hadn't really had that conversation before. And I was like, it is a bit of an odd thing to be like, hey, so we just met. We're going to play a fun little
game,
storytelling
where I tell you about all of my traumas.
Roll some dice. But before we do, what I need us all to do, and I need you to be cool with and responsive to, is we're going to go through a list.
A come to Jesus talk.
And like, if it bugs you, can you raise your hand?
Yeah.
And I'm like, but so like, that's just as a concept is odd.
Yeah.
And I think how I like to do it, I think you're the same, is like, we actually have a list.
We have a physical list.
And I think like for Vampire the Masquerade, which I will start running soon, I'm going to have a more expansive list than we even have run before. And probably a bit more detailed, just because like, even though we know each other quite well, I'm like, when we get to the nitty gritty of like, where are the lines on what we're cool with.
Exactly.
And because like the new campaign we just joined is like an Eldritch Horror campaign.
Exactly.
Like, our your campaign is not a horror campaign, but it's always good to know.
It's good
where
to
those
know,
lines
and
lay.
like that doesn't negate that there won't be dangerous situations that you'll be put in that
Exactly.
could broach those subjects.
Yeah.
And it's always good to have on hand to know your limitations, because as you know, as a DM, your priority is to make sure that everybody's having fun and everybody's comfortable.
Exactly. And that you as the DM are also comfortable.
Exactly.
And that you're not having to narrate anything that is triggering for you, or that's
Exactly.
bad for your brain, or, just not good. And like, there's a line between like, oh, a traumatic thing happening to my character and just being a bit of a masochist when it comes to that, and love, and like just living for the trauma.
Uh-huh.
And then also something that actually touches on things that you have as a person have experienced that are sending you. We're not trying to bring up shit you're addressing in therapy without your consent.
For sure. As much as D&D is also an outlet for
It comes
for,
up
for
like
trauma.
sometimes, but yeah, we're not doing like your big T trauma.
Yeah.
And-
Capital T, bold trauma.
And I think it's a thing where we go through, and like if it's a group of friends and you're fairly comfortable, like it is pretty easy to just go through the list and someone will be like, hey, but it's a thing of you don't have to tell us why.
No.
Be like, and this is a thing for
Absolutely
you to
not.
just be like, I'd rather not, or we'll kind of like stoplight it, like
Yeah.
use that, and it's like, red light, yellow light.
Yeah. The varying
light thing.
systems. I think Alyssa has soccer cards.
She does. She has like a red card and a yellow card.
A red card and a
She
yellow
just
card.
throw.
That she will use sparingly
Mm-hmm.
whenever anyone's being dumb.
Yes. Sometimes it's a joke, and sometimes if she
Sometimes
has an
it's a
actual
joke, and then
issue.
there's serious moments for it. But yeah, it's a super important thing to do. And kind of in line with like how we're starting this, like it should be one of the first things that you encounter when
Yeah.
you're entering that
Yes.
space.
And I think with like our past experiences and with the past campaign that like you, me, Alyssa, and Bex played in with that past DM and a few other players, it was a Ravenloft campaign.
yeah,
And so it was implicitly horror and also kink, because why not, right?
Yeah. Because we're fucked up hoes, and we're not going to dig into why we were
'Cause
like,
the
oh,
thing
is this a scary campaign with
Yeah.
horror elements?
Yes.
What if it was also horny?
Right. Like, is this for me?
Yeah, this is for me.
Yeah, because like the kink community and the D&D community, that Venn diagram is a circle.
It's a goddamn circle.
So it's the thing where like our DM knew everybody at the table really well.
Yes.
And so he implicitly knew what our triggers were, like I think at a general level, just because he knew us.
Yeah, because of the discussions we just had in general.
Yeah, and just like the friendship that we had like individually with him. But we did not know each other's
Yeah.
like triggers or things that could set each other off. And also, to be fair, like there are sometimes niche things that come up that like may have never come up in a
Yeah, or
friendship.
like you didn't even think about until
Yeah.
you were in the moment.
Or it's like there's something that like traumatically happened to you in the past that you just don't really talk about and you have not confided in. So it's like that it didn't go poorly. Like we managed it fine.
Yeah.
But it is a thing looking back and like
So, like,
toward
we
the end of
could
that
have had
campaign.
a formal conversation.
And after we left, and when I was thinking about how I would want to run my own table, it's like I like that was not super responsible
yeah,
of any of us
Yeah.
to do.
like I think especially given the context of like I think lines and veils are more important in games where you are exploring those horror settings.
Absolutely.
And then even triple so because we were also adding an element of kink
yes.
to ours. And
Yeah.
so although yeah, like you said, some of us were brand new, like we had just met at the
Totally.
start of that campaign. You and I were friends for a while, but
Yeah,
like I
we've
don't
been
think
friends
we
for like 2 years.
I don't think we had
but,
really
like,
gotten into any
Yeah.
crazy
We
conversations
just-
about triggers or anything like that.
not really. I mean, we knew the big
the big
things,
ones, but
it's like, yeah, it's not really a conversation where we're like, hey, so what's your list of traumatic things that have happened?
Yeah,
that's
that's
not
not-
really something.
that's not something you just talk about over coffee.
I mean, maybe some people do it, but like you and I are also too bad at being vulnerable with people and relying on people to have that conversation.
Listen, you can use her inside voice, so don't need to come for me like that.
you know,
Here in your
you're
home.
the same bitch in different fonts. So it's like, yeah, we knew some things, but Yeah, like it's just not a really thing where it's like, all right, pre to having this human interaction, let's see what like that's not how it happens.
So yeah, I agree in the sense that like on everybody involved in that scenario, we could have had a formal conversation, although albeit it never got to a point of like extreme discomfort. We managed,
and the DM was good at like catching and pausing when we needed to, and people were also good at like removing themselves, or
if
like
that scene was not for
we're like
them.
This isn't really, or just like if maybe something happened they were like a little squeamish about, to be like, moving forward, this is a thing for me and I'm gonna step out, and then doing that forward. So like we still handled it well and handled it safely, but it's just like it's a thing of the principle of it looking back, and just as a best practice I was like, that was sort of an edge case campaign where it's like we were playing with some dark stuff, which I love. I've never made an emotionally,
we live for it in this house.
I've never made an emotionally stable character in my life. But going along with that, you have to, there's a level of care I think that should be taken, and
100%.
just like, again, psychology. Like this shit is my bread and butter, and right? Like it's a responsibility thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also think like even beyond just the element of like discussing triggers or what have you at the table, it also kind of sets a tone for open communication with you and your players.
Yes.
Especially in cases where you're like, some of us don't know each other this well. And like you said, some of us, I'm not gonna look at any reflective surfaces in this moment, don't like being vulnerable with people.
Yeah.
And
no, it's also me. I've been in therapy for many years. I'll say that with my whole face.
With people that they don't know or they're not super familiar with, but it does help kind of open up that channel, I think.
Yeah, and it sort of sets that precedent of, well, it's like, yes, it's like, is it a thing where even like I've had awkward moments where it's like I'm uncomfortable with something. Do I say it at the table? Of course not, because I am anxious and I have historically a fawn response, and like no, but like it sets, you have that precedent of like, okay, even if you don't say it in the moment, you feel safe to talk about it later, or to go and like get it, just
address it at some point with the other players in the DM at your own comfort level.
And I think the fact that if you can address it casually and just be like, hey, this is like a thing we're gonna do, it's not a big deal. I'm not trying to like,
it's not a big deal.
I'm not trying to get everybody's life story.
We can pivot accordingly.
But yeah, just I want to know like what we're comfortable with and what we're not.
100%. Yeah, it's something definitely like and you know, sometimes like I think like you mentioned where it's sometimes you don't realize that there are things that are going to bother you until definitely. Sometimes it's not even just about triggers. Sometimes you're like, I need a reality check on this particular scene because it's a little intense.
It's also an interesting thing that I really like bleed over, which is definitely a thing of like D&D is effectively improv, and so it's like that's something that's pretty in like theater communities and improv communities. Like bleed over is talked about and addressed really proactively, but it's talked about like less openly in D&D, I think, just because we're not quite like, it's improv, but it's like, it's not like thrown under necessarily that same umbrella. When people don't think of tabletop roleplay games in the same
as like
mental category.
Theatrical art.
Yes. It's kind of like going to an improv class and like we're gonna yell at each other over like our fictional mother's trauma. Like whatever. I've never taken an improv class. I probably
Me either,
should.
Although it probably would be super great for
it would probably be really fun. I'm just
at the table. No, and it's like
and it's like having that way of like being able to check yourself. And then like starting it and like check in with be it the DM, checking in with the players checking in with each other, or whatever, being like, okay, we just role played
something pretty intense,
an intense argument or whatever, and it's like, all right, or like something didn't go the way we want it to, and the characters are frustrated, and maybe the people are also frustrated.
Sometimes you are frustrated as a player about the in-character decisions being made at the table.
Yes, and so there's that moment of like, okay, was that fight a fight in character? Or was it also kind of a fight in person? Like, and if it was, like, where human emotions bleed over, that's okay. But it's like, are we good? Or do we need to take a few minutes and
reality check a little bit,
parse back out and be like, okay, this is me, Mariah, the person that is controlling this character, and this is the character, and what their motivations are, and their feelings and their reactions, which are not mine.
Yeah. And like the lines and veil discussion, I think sets that tone really early to have those conversations be capable of being had in game, out of game, pre, post, whatever.
It makes check-ins really normal.
And you know, as you start getting into that space, like, I don't give a fuck who you think you are. I don't give a fuck if you made this character 5 minutes ago and you named him Boblin the Goblin.
Listen, Boblin, some shit's happened to Boblin the Goblin.
You will find that at some level you've inserted yourself into that character. It might not be all of you. It might be a little portion of you.
Yeah.
It might be
whether you do it consciously or unconsciously.
Whether you do it consciously or unconsciously. I don't care if you didn't have a backstory for this character before you even started rolling some dice. As the story progresses, at some point, you're inserting a part of yourself in here.
Something subconsciously at least is driving.
Yeah. And then it can happen so quickly where somebody makes a statement about your character. You're like, that's a statement about me. And someone just opened the door in the house.
Right.
And whacked me with a baseball bat
with matchsticks
over my head.
And like it's falling now. Yeah. It's very interesting. And like I am somebody where I like to play dark characters and I like to play with the darker elements of humanity through tabletop role playing. Like hence why I'm running Vampire the Masquerade, right? Like we're a consistent brand. But in that, I have to also be very responsible with and accountable to myself and communicative with the people I'm playing with in my DM, and the fact of like, I'm good stepping into this, but I'm also aware that I might be opening myself up to feeling some not great feelings.
Yeah.
And that's okay. But I have to prepare for that. And I have to do a lot. And like, I am very big on being accountable.
I think there's accountability for both the players and the DM, respectively, because you have to look out for your own interests as well.
Absolutely. And it's hard, like, or it seems to be hard as a DM. Like I've seen DMs like take a moment, pause, and be like, is everything okay or whatever? And just the feeling in the air is that everything is definitely not okay. And then someone's like, no, yeah, I'm fine. And it's like, I understand that impulse also to be like, I don't like, I just had a moment sort of that where it's like, if someone had asked me, I would have batted it out of the air, because it's like, I'm not okay, but I'm also not going to talk about it right now.
Yeah.
And so it's like, that's a hard push and pull, and both sides are understandable. I think that's why, like, if you can create that culture where it's very easy and nonchalant almost, talk about like, this is what might come up for me, or then in those moments where it is charged for you emotionally, you can still, like, you're not nonchalant about it anymore, but you can still communicate the things that you need to communicate.
Exactly.
To keep yourself safe emotionally, to keep other people emotionally safe, to continue having fun.
Yeah, I mean,
because at the end of the day, it is a game. It is a hobby.
It is a game and a hobby, and it shouldn't have to be that serious.
It's not that deep.
It's not that deep. And no, like I remember, for example, like we go back to the Kink campaign because it's a really good example of this. And also I think on the note of the self insert and people opening doors and me looking at myself in ways that I didn't think about before. That it was a Kink campaign, but before we had decided there would be Kink elements, I had already made my character. And I was already too invested in the story behind this character that I was like, I'm not going to switch it up now because I really like this. And she was already integrated with a big NPC in the campaign. So
you're already invested in her. Like,
I was already invested.
You had the Pinterest boards.
I had the Pinterest boards, the playlists, the maladaptive daydreaming long drives.
I feel like we can't.
Can't go back. Now. It's locked in now. And just entering that campaign. And then we ran into a little bit of an issue in that the DM was having a hard time conceptualizing intimacy with a robot because my character was a little warforged. And I was like, homie, if you need me to send you source material, I have it.
But,
I
like,
have it plenty.
you're like, I can give you what you need.
I
or
can give you
whatever
what you need, and
tools
we
you
can
need.
finesse whatever you need me to finesse. Does she
Yeah.
need to have attachments?
Do
Does
we
she
need to have a very specific shop
yeah,
that she visits?
a very specific
Like,
vendor.
What do we? What do you need from me
Yeah.
to get this going?
And unfortunately, it was just something we could not find common ground on. And as I started playing her, I would say she was the first time I played a character outside of my comfort zone. Like truly
Yeah.
a character that I was not at the time I thought not self-inserted. And because normally I play pretty like promiscuous
Like
and sexually confident
forward
characters. And because that is just the kind of person I am in real
And
life.
it's fun.
And it's very easy for me to tap into, and it's fun. You know, who doesn't love a horny bard?
Yeah.
But I, ironically enough, made like a sexless,
And asexual.
an asexual, sexless bard robot. And so I was like, okay, one, I'm having to play someone that doesn't express or emote a lot. And then two,
Mhm.
me and my DM are not finding ways for her to be intimate. So I can't.
Yeah, so
I
you
also
can't build anything like
yeah,
that.
and I also cannot find it in myself as I started playing the character to find ways to justify her being more
Yeah.
sexual.
Because it's like, there's a thing of like, there are a ton of different ways to play a Warforged.
Yeah.
But where Cadence, that character, went, of like, you did kind of get, through no fault of like yours or the DMs or anything.
I got
really,
kind of locked
like
into
I kind of
this.
pigeonholed into
Yeah.
like, this is a very, and not if there's anything wrong with like playing a pretty like celibate ace character.
Yeah,
I got to
absolutely
switch and
not.
play
It's just something I
a
was
creepy
never
monk.
I had never done before. And I was
Yes.
having a hard time kind of,
And you didn't really plan for.
yeah, and I was having a hard time kind of stepping into the suit of my character and
Yes.
realizing how to play her. And then I
And
also
because of that miscommunicate and just
Yeah.
that kind of miscommunication, lack of understanding, whatever, it was hard to, you couldn't make the bigger shifts you maybe would have needed to make with Cadence
Yeah.
to then direct her in a way where it's like, all right, she got a software update and she can
Something.
do this now.
Like,
Like,
I
literally something. I don't
find
know.
something that could help me justify it to,
Yes.
to get her in there.
And so that sort of, you felt
Yeah.
more locked in.
I felt pretty trapped and locked in. And then I also had just a moment of like realization that I was going through this whole, you know, as much of a sexual being that I am, that also in turn causes people to sexualize you often. And then I was having like these realizations about all these characters that I've played so far. And I was like, ooh, we're gonna
You're like, damn, I self-inserted in a way that I wasn't prepared for.
yeah. And I was like, I'm gonna
Or aware
cut
of.
that and like playing and realizing that like I'm having a hard time playing Cadence because like I don't know how
Because
to,
she isn't being sexualized at
and
all.
I don't know how to work in an environment where I'm not using sex as a power or being sexualized. And I was like, ooh, sheesh. It's like, oh no.
Like, I need to take a lap.
Oh, it was listen, it
I
was
need
it
to cool
was a
down.
hardcore realization for me. And I was like,
Yeah.
ooh, I need to step away. I remember having the conversation with that DM about that realization, and he's like, that sounds like something you need to work through, Chief. And I was like, you're
it's like,
correct.
that seems like something for a mental health professional.
You are correct.
Yeah, and it's like, that's an interesting thing where like sometimes you can have those realizations and then like still be cool to play that character, and sometimes you can have those things and be like, all right, I love things about this character.
Yeah.
And like, as you sort of, once you had a different plan, you were able to kind of drop what you felt was shackling you a bit and just have fun
Yeah.
with Cadence until
Yeah.
our final days.
Yeah.
But it is that thing of like, all right, it would be better and healthier and lighter for me to step back from this. And now like I have this information that I wasn't prepared
Yeah.
to glean. And I'll deal with that in my own
In my
way
own
and time
outside time.
that is not at a table with 6 other human souls
Exactly.
in a fantasy world. Like that, not great.
Yeah, that's something I need to take responsibility for outside
Right.
of here.
Like we'll do some journaling, we'll find a prompt for it. Like I don't know, but we're not gonna do
Goes and pays for a whole therapist, and I'm like, I am gonna sit here and tell you about every D&D character I've made up until this point, and we're gonna talk about it. Because one of our players, Alyssa, genuinely does that, and like,
I had to do it in my last therapy session. I had to go in. I'm like, I told you I play D&D, right? She's like, yeah. and she's does not. So I was like, cool, I'm gonna have to explain this in a way where I give you the information that you need clinically to make a conclusion, but I don't just like go off in the weeds of like explaining how spell casting works, because that's not relevant.
That's not what we're talking about here.
Yeah, so it's always interesting.
Yeah, but it is something that like it made me have a realization about all the future characters that I was making, and then but also in turn I started exploring that self-insert in different ways. And that, like, now I kind of parse out a little bit of like, what part of me am I going to throw in here?
That's what I like to do that too.
And it's really helped me explore like different parts of my personality that don't rely on just solely that fact.
That's why I like to play with the darker stuff, because it's things where like the person I am and the values that I have and things like there's a ton of things I would never have no desire to do. But you have those little intrusive thoughts. And so it's like, well, what if I took this intrusive thought and I made a person around that and they gave themselves permission to be a monster? What then? And like, that's interesting to play with. And it's interesting as someone like, I think I have a weird ability to like psychoanalyze myself and be like abstract about it.
Same.
Yeah. And like mine is definitely from this like psych background too, which is probably arguably not healthy. According to said therapist, should stop doing that. But yeah, it's an interesting, fun little thing of like, you can look at yourself in abstract almost in a way that's kind of cool.
Yeah. It is super cool and introspective. And something that you don't really realize when you're like, I just signed up to play make believe with a bunch of adults.
Yeah.
When our schedule was lined up and the Google Calendar invite was accepted.
And you don't have to. Like, we both, I think, have characters where we just show up, we sign on to Discord, we show up at the table, and we roll dice.
Yeah.
And like, we have our I have my rogue character. I'm like, she stabs a lot. I like rolling that sneak attack damage.
I love the good damage.
The good maraca shake of all those damage dice. It's good for my brain. And yeah, like I have ideas and like I've talked to that DM and like there's other things I could do with her character, but I like that campaign is more light and that it's more just about, bebopping around the fantasy world. Yeah. And it isn't super plot heavy and emotional, and it's not like a hyper fixation and I'm thinking like with the Strixhaven campaign, like we leave the table and for the next month until we play again
your mind is reeling about the possibilities and the consequences of your actions.
Characters A, B, C, D, E, F, and G are involved in this, and what's their perspective? How are they going to react? How is this going to set off a chain of reactions? And I'm texting you about NPCs, and I'm like, not in a metagamey way, but just in a like, we both need the stimulus of like, discussing.
I need something to carry me through until a month later.
Yeah.
We're gonna sit down
like,
at the
I need to
table.
get like a lay of the land as the player, so I can know what my character is sitting in and I can like orient appropriately.
100%. Yeah. It's always that good stimmy. And then like, I think taking it back, I know we fucking ramble, but
we fully did. I definitely had a moment where I was like, fuck, this episode's supposed to be a Lines and Veils, and
we're gone.
We're off in the fields.
And the veils did veil. And
we're in the back 40 right now. Like, we're not even,
but I think,
can't see the road.
I think taking it back to that Lines and Veils, and then like also opening lines of communication. Yeah. I had an experience with a DM for an online campaign where when we first started, he was a new DM. That was his first campaign he was starting with. And I remember, these are also people that I've never met. We're only playing online, so I don't even have like,
you've never met them in person.
I've got names and that's it. And I think we were in a dungeon or something, and there just kept being situations where I was like, maybe I didn't agree with this rolling, but like, he's a first time DM, and I'm gonna let it ride. But then there was a point where I think I was also still what I would consider like relatively new to D&D. And so I would say where I'm good with role play at the time, I was not very good at combat or like strategizing my turn.
And I will say like our mutual friend DM that played the DM, I almost said directed, kind of as a director.
A director, yeah.
That DM'd the Ravenloft campaign, and then the campaign before that, where you and I met, was very forgiving about mechanical stuff.
Yeah.
And like he adhered to rules in a way, but he had certain things that he just didn't like. Like he didn't like touch healing. So it's like all healing was AoE healing.
Yeah.
And then so you go to like other DMs and they're like,
you're like, I got spoiled a little
they're like,
bit.
that's OP as fuck. And it's like, well, because our DM was annoyed by the concept of touch healing. So he's like, fuck it, I do what I want. But like other DMs don't do that. So it's like, oh, okay. This is you have to treat each DM
individually because sometimes you get a little bit spoiled with the home rules of your game. So like I was like, trying to take a step back and be like, this is a different DM, these are different rules, and
I was like, you don't know these people.
I don't know these people, and he is just starting to DM, so I don't want to.
We're online, so you can't see tone, you can't see facial expressions.
Yeah, so there's lots of factors going into it, but I remember there was a point where like I said, I was not super great at strategizing my turn or understanding the action economy kind of thing, or all of my own abilities yet. This is a class I haven't played before. And I made some decisions that, in retrospect, are pretty stupid. Like now knowing what I know, but I was taking the perspective of like me playing a video game versus me playing D&D, and I think I was trying to do something to the element of like kiting the enemies through a hallway and creating like a bottleneck situation. And I was the first one to go, and so I did that, and so he made kind of a comment about like, okay, well, Valendra has opted to just be in this corner and hide and not do anything with her turn, pretty much.
Yeah.
And it was like a little underhanded comment, and
it's kind of just like,
it hit me weird. And in retrospect, like now knowing what I know, what I didn't know then, like, is like I was a rogue assassin, and I was first in initiative order.
And knowing that DM is now as a person, like you can sort of interpret it better, like hit with his tone and his humor style.
Exactly. But in the moment, it hit me wrong, and like our old DM was also a player in that campaign, so I remember DMing him in the moment and being like, "Am I crazy, or like did that kind of suck?"
Yeah, is it fair that irked me?
Yeah, and he was like, "I can see why like that would irritate you, or like the tone of it." He like just like talk to him about it, but I had the nerves of like, and me, I am not a.
You're one of the more outspoken women that I know, and I mean that genuinely as a compliment. Like through my friendship with you has done so much good shit for my confidence and just my ability to like be less hard on myself and love myself more and all of that. But yeah, you are not generally a person that is
afraid of conflict.
Right, exactly.
Is a nice way to say it. But
I mean, you're not confrontational, but it's just like you aren't averse to conflict if it's necessary.
But I did have a moment of it was like insecurity in my own ability and knowledge in the game, and then being called out on it.
And being called out on it
and by a person that I don't know.
Shitty.
Yeah, it felt shitty. And also like now I'm having to confront this person about it in a way that like I don't know this man. And also I'm like the only woman in the party.
I was about to say, like, I thought you were the only
at the time I was,
and you were the newest party member,
and I was the newest party member by a lot. Like all these guys have played with each other.
Yes.
And I was just like this new girl coming in, and there is a level of like that kind of carried over insecurity from like my gaming days of like the reason I don't play online,
like being on the servers with all
and like men talking shit about my ability because I suck. And I'm like, well, I don't get the opportunity to learn because you're yelling. I'm getting yelled at by 12-year-olds about how I'm 300 pounds and ugly. And like random shit like that.
You're like, I know I'm bad. Like I accept that I'm bad at video games.
Yeah. And so it was an element of like, I think a lot of that was getting brought back up for me. And I think that falls in that like things you didn't expect would bother you.
Yeah.
And then they come up in the moment. And I eventually did like, I think after the game was done, because it kind of set a sour tone for me for the rest of the game.
Yeah. I remember you messaging me like you texted me after you y'all like finish playing that session.
Mhm.
You're like that night or the next day, and you're like, this happened. And then like, no, that's valid.
Yeah.
Because I also didn't, I mean, I've still never really met. I met like one of the guys
Mhm.
very briefly, but I still like, I didn't know these people. So I'm like, yeah, just objectively, I see like that would have also
Yeah.
bugged me.
But like, you know, I approached him, I let him know, and we had a good conversation about it. And he had like, I didn't even like think about it that way. And he's like, I can definitely see why my tone and the comment in the moment, like it's not great. And, you know, we talked about how like also respectively, he comes from an environment where he only plays with men, and like the riffing and the roasting is often and frequent.
Sure. And it's like, it's not that like you can't handle
It's not that I
being
can't
riffed or
handle
roasted.
it.
It's just like if someone doesn't know you and hasn't like established that
That
friendship and that
rapport.
rapport, yeah, it's like you kind of haven't earned the right.
Yeah, you
roast
have
me.
not earned the right to poke the bear.
And like I kind of have had a similar situation in the campaign, the newer campaign we're currently playing in, where like I put my character in a sort of confrontational position, and I knew that going in, but then it turned to be more confrontational than I thought it was.
Mhm.
And I'm like, this is hitting some bad things
Mhm.
for my brain. And one, because like my expectations were misaligned with what it really is, and that's certainly not the DM's fault. It's honestly really not my fault, because also the nature of improv is as you yes and your way through it,
Yeah.
things polarize.
Yeah.
And like characters become extreme. And you think someone's just like a normal dude, and you're like, he's a whole himbo. Now, because
I feel
just
called out.
how I mean, yeah, I'm just like it happens.
It happens,
Like that's
yeah.
a very known and established thing in improv communities. But so it's kind of like, okay, like why am I feeling like this? And it's weird knowing that you're sitting in like this situation, playing a game, rolling dice, playing a game.
Yeah.
And you're like, I'm having an emotional reaction that feels incongruous with what is happening. And I know it's deeper
Yeah.
than just this event or this exchange or the way this person is speaking to me. Like, I know the reason that it bothers me is like tied to 80 strings that I can pull. But it's in like, and having to sit there, and for me, I'm sort of like, I sort of just start shutting down
Mhm.
when I feel that way. And so, because I get frustrated and upset, and then I get anxious and guilty over the fact that I'm frustrated and upset, and then I start masking more and more and more, and then I shut down, and I'm like, please God, don't perceive me.
Mhm.
Like, role play with anyone else for 10 minutes.
Please divert all attention away from me. I am a house plant sitting in this chair.
Literally. I was like, if I could become one with the stool I am sitting on, that would be ideal. I need a minute. And so like I had to kind of take that and sit with it and parse and be like, okay, this is maybe a situation where like one, my communication style and that DM's communication style are just different, and we don't know each other super well yet. And I'm reactive to certain things, and particularly in the way of like when it feels like men are being combative with me, of like it's very easy for that to kind of put me on the back foot and make me bristle, even if it's combative in a role play sense, right? If I end, because I've thought about like, I don't have that problem with you, or like I haven't had that problem with the previous DM who's a good friend of mine, but and it's like, well, why? I'm like, okay, well, maybe I just, because I don't know this person that well yet, and that's okay. But like I had to do that work of sitting and like separating it out and being like, okay, this is practically in the game what I need. And it was just like, to make a new character and make a weird little creepy Way of the Long Death monk who like wears a plague mask and just bops around and collects bones. And just have a chiller interpretation with it and let it ride and see where it goes, and don't feel like I need to bring in a novella of lore for every character that I play, which like ironically, I feel like
that is your preferred character creation like method.
Absolutely. And like there's a reason. That's why when I decided I wanted to run something, I went to Vampire the Masquerade, because it's all character driven. And that's why I specifically went to the Camarilla and why we're doing Fall of London is because the court politics and all of like the different factions and everyone working against each other and all that jazz. Like, yeah, I want to sit for hours and build characters and figure out who they are and what has happened in their life and their relationship to other NPCs and to other characters and how they're viewed by different people and how that affects the chain of events. You know, like, I'm a writer. That's my bread and butter. But you could still have fun just being a little kooky weirdo and rolling your dice. And I feel like I should have known that because I do that already, like in another campaign. But for some reason, I think my brain was in like the mode it's in with your campaign.
Yeah.
And I was like, it copy pasted when it shouldn't have, because like I didn't take my own advice and be like, okay, this is a separate thing that I need to approach as its own entity and not try to use another past experience as the mantle by which I judge this.
Exactly. And I think it's also hard in that specific scenario because like we've mentioned before, we play Strixhaven once a month. We play that other campaign in the same exact weekend.
Yeah, the day after. So you are getting back-to-back vastly different experiences. Yes. And like, it's not like the game is fun. It's not a bad experience at all. It's just different. And that's okay. And that's good, in fact. But yeah, it was just that thing of like, I had to sit and identify and parse through and figure out like, okay, all I really need from my DM is to just play a different character.
Yeah.
That's like, I'm not in a place really where, and some of it is definitely my own stuff and like personal life and work stuff where like I've had to deal with men being combative and like disrespectful and like it almost became an HR issue.
Yeah.
And so I'm like also aware of like, this is a hot button for me right now.
Yeah. Because you're like, I kind of did walk myself into a room with this character where that's like almost all the interactions she's going to have.
And I didn't think about that at all. And I'm like, that's fully on me.
Yeah.
Like that was my bad. And so like, okay, let's just hit reset and come at it from a different angle and relax a lot.
Yeah.
And
because at the end of the day,
it's a game.
It's a game. It's a hobby. It's not that serious. If you're starting to get uncomfortable, don't think that, other people don't go through it. Like,
oh yeah,
it's a normal experience. And especially when you're delving into parts of your personality that you didn't realize or scenarios that you've never encountered before, but are now encountering in kind of a fictional sense.
Or you're getting thrown for like a realization loop. Yeah. Where you're having to like figure out or realize something about yourself or having to figure out why you're feeling some kind of way of like, it can very much it can be very isolating. It can be like, okay, everybody's having a great time and I'm the only one that's not.
Yeah. And
it's like, that's not like, that is valid and it does feel like that at the moment, but there's a simple way to fix it.
Absolutely. And like, I've had similar experiences where I also kind of got into a bad headspace of at one point, like, I think I was going through well, I mean, we're not going to get into it, but I was already going through a lot of emotional stress.
Yeah, absolutely.
Dealing with dynamics with certain people that were at that table, but we loved that game so much. And I think there was a pre-planned scene for like, we were going into like a largely role play based session where it was us deciding like, what is our character going to do in this downtime post a big battle? Yeah. And me and him, the DM, had worked out like a lot of details about how that was going to look and the things that were going to happen in that time. Of her downtime. And it was going to be pretty important, pretty significant for this character.
Yes.
And then we actually get into it and, it's kind of like there's an element of you create the structure of the scene and the main points you're going to hit, but we wanted to, role play out.
Yeah, let it be natural.
The interactions. But we know that it's going to start and end in this trajectory.
Yeah, and like you're going to have these concrete abilities, whatever, coming out of it that you're now going to be able to work
and
with.
Then, I watched him do these scenes with other people and they were all great scenes. And then we get to mine and there's a point where we divert from the narrative of what we had discussed.
Right.
And I'm kind of looking at him and like, it's not going the way
I
that
remember watching that and not really knowing what was going on.
yeah.
Like,
And I was like, well,
there,
again, you're kind of you're trapped in the scene of yes anding, and I was like, I mean, you control the world, so I can't dictate outside of this.
yeah.
So I played along with it at first, and I think when the scene concluded, I was like expecting there to be more, and maybe he just has a different plan for how it's going to happen. And when it didn't, I was like, is that it? And he's like, yeah. And like we moved on, and it threw me into such like a bad headspace that I wasn't expecting or ready for. And I think it's when a lot of emotional stress as I was dealing with other stuff outside factors. And then this happened, and I just kind of got into this headspace of like feeling disregarded.
Yeah.
And I was like, I had an expectation going into it.
Yeah, and you thought like we're like, oh, like we did the work and we communicated and that's like, and like I know what's gonna happen, and then that didn't happen.
Doing that in an effort with a character that I'm already uncomfortable playing and feeling like I'm not playing to their full potential.
Yes.
So I think that I just got into a little spiral.
Yeah, and it's like I'm trying, and I feel like my effort was discarded a little bit.
And that feeling of sitting at that table and realizing everybody else is having so much fun, and I am spiraling at the moment.
Very much, yeah.
And
feel that.
You know, I think at one point, like the person next to me messaged me asking if I was okay, because they could tell that like something was off. And then I think I messaged him privately during the session, being like, "Hey, what happened to this and this and that?" And
really, I waited until we took a break and asked you, because I could tell something was wrong, but I was like, I didn't want to ask you in the middle, and then it'd be like,
and you're like, I'm gonna break down right here, right now.
Yeah, I'm like, I know you well enough that I'm like, I'll grab you when we take a break and ask. But
then, you know, upon messaging him, yes, we had all that discussion pre-planned prior to the session, but apparently he had written a message where he was like, hey, actually, we're not going to do these parts because I want to do those later as a different element of your character development. And he just never sent that message.
Right.
It was just left there in the ether. And so I had an expectation. He thought he had communicated. And it was just the wires crossed in an inopportune moment.
Right. And like, and also think of like, you can, like, that's gonna happen. Like we're people.
We are people.
Like and no one is infallible.
It is not his fault. It is not my fault.
Right.
It's its own thing. And so once that happened, I was like, oh, okay, I feel fine with it. Like,
you're like, it makes sense.
Now it makes sense.
I'm like, it didn't, like, there was an ADHD moment, and that's understandable.
And that's perfectly
fine. But like, this wasn't a weird moment of like you giving me less than you were giving other people, or like you pulling the rug out from under me in some way. Like I expected a thing and then I got 50% of it.
Exactly.
And then it's like, oh, okay, that makes sense. But you still had the emotion and the experience of like that feeling bad.
Yeah. And like, again,
and that's fair. And I think that's where like it comes back to establishing that culture of open communication.
Exactly.
And so that like you can deal with that, and like you can take a break, and you can like, you know, everybody can get snacks or whatever, and you can sort out what happened, and then kind of be like, okay, straighten it out in your brain, and we can keep playing.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to turn into a thing where you spiral so far that you fully shut down.
Yeah. And then at that point, you're not having fun. Nobody else is having fun because they realize like you're in a moment, and like, you know, it's having the realization that like, if you are going through something at that table, just because everybody else is having fun does not mean that they would ever want you to not have fun for their sake.
Yes. And that is hard. It's easy to say that, and it's hard
to do it in the moment.
Because like we've both been there, and it's very easy to be the person that's like, if there's a problem, like tell, like, of course, like say something. Yeah. But then when it's you that has the problem, you're like, I am aware, but that rule doesn't fully apply to me.
I am the exception in all things.
And you're not, but it's just like, I don't want to, like, that seems awkward and tense, and I don't want to make it weird.
Yeah. But it's having the knowledge that like, okay, perfectly fair. Maybe you're spiraling in the moment at the table and you don't want to ruin the vibe, but you know, you can
between that session and the next, like definitely
address it.
Don't just let it fester and torture and haunt your soul for like the next however long you play that campaign.
And you know, like sit your DM down. I know, especially like for me in my case, like I would be horrified to know that like any of you had some kind of poor experience, didn't communicate it, and then we're no longer having fun at the table.
Yeah.
When it could have been something that we could have easily remedied or fixed or pivoted
Yeah.
or addressed in whatever way, shape, and fashion.
Exactly. And I think it's like we are all, because the four of us are so close, and it's like we're each other's, you know, our best friends. It's super easy for us to read each other and know each other and tell when it's an in character issue versus it's a personal, like person issue. And it's a lot easier to, if there were ever any problems, which the chance of that happening is already quite low because you know us so well. It's a lot easier to address that versus where, like, in most cases, in the cases where, in that, like, if you're not that comfortable and close-knit with everybody at the table, even if you're friends, even if you like them, like maybe they're new, or maybe like you're not bonded like that. And more often than not, you're gonna, like, situations are gonna come up where even like little things of like a disagreement over, like, should it be an action to take a potion versus a bonus action? And it, like, is that the hill to die on? Like,
are we now in a Mexican standoff across the table?
Or it's like, if your DM is like, no, it really should take an action because that quirk is sealed in there. Then it's like, all right, if I can take some action, fine. But it's still worth talking about.
And like, I think also, you know, in the respect of establishing that, like, comfy communication with Strixhaven, for example, prior to it being just the three of y'all, we had those two other players and they were brand baby spanking new.
Oh yeah,
brand baby spanking new.
Between like, it was you and then one of them and me.
I'm like, I need one of you babies on either side of me.
And then Bex. And yeah, so it's like we're sandwiched in with like experienced
players and Mama DM.
You're like, you are cocooned.
In wraps. And I also, like, you know, when we started and then we had our lines and veils discussion and we also established a lot of house rules, I implemented like nonverbal ways to have timeouts, you know,
which I like a lot,
because those two people respectively, I knew have a lot of social anxiety, and
and like I also have a lot,
and entering a new space where you're like, I'm role playing for the first time, and this is nerve wracking
with new people, doing a new thing, and like I want to do well, and I want to I want this to be fun and to like get along. It's so easy,
and I wanted to
discard your own.
I wanted to establish and let them know that, like, if you don't want to interrupt a scene because social anxiety, but it is encroaching on things that you might be uncomfortable with, like, there is a nonverbal cue. I think for us, we just did like a physical team with your hand that you could do. And I asked other players at the table to also hold to that, in that if I'm in the scene and I don't see this person making a tea with their hands, somebody else that is comfortable voicing it
knows you a bit more,
like, hey, time out real quick. Or they also make a tea until everyone at the table is making a tea. And you're like, okay, this is now, we are all tea posing at the table and levitating. And you're like, okay, maybe we pause the scene. But I wanted to implement those things because you have to take into account that some people have a harder time speaking.
It's tough. And like, it's so easy to overthink that. And it's so easy to be like, well, it would be simpler and smoother and just more fun for the other people if I don't stop and like have this conversation about this thing that's bugging me. And whether that's in a session, whether that's between sessions, whatever. But if you don't address the thing, like, it doesn't just suddenly not become a problem.
Exactly.
And even if you can kind of like rationalize it to yourself and put it away, it's still going to affect the level of comfort and like vulnerability you can reach with those other players, with the DM, and not to say that you have to just like gut yourself at every table. Like, everybody does not have to be.
You do not have to bare your fucking soul.
No, by no means. And like, arguably, you shouldn't. Like, everyone doesn't need to know everything about you. That's one of like my big soapboxes of just like, this is a fun little message from my almost 28 years circling the earth of like, you can have different levels of relationship with people. And that 100%. Is healthy and good. But like, if you want it to ever kind of go a bit deeper, then it's even more important to be able to have that communication.
Have that communication, have those lines and veils established, and know where where the walls are in the playpen.
Yeah,
you know?
for sure.
And keep that separation in hand. Yeah, super, super important. And, you know, at the end of the day, it's just a fucking game.
It's just a fucking
It's just a fucking game. It's just a hobby, and it's not that serious. And
we got 53 minutes. I thought we weren't going to get a full hour out of this. I don't know
and
why.
here we are.
I don't know why I doubted us, but I was like, we're going to start. And I was like, I'm like, can we rant about it?
Listen, I have no doubts because
And then we started going on tangents, and I'm like, no, we got it.
I told you the tangents fill the void. Fill the existential dread.
It's locked in. We got it.
100%. And, you know, it's the entire reason why we started this, because I was like, I have full confidence that you and I could sit here for 12 fucking hours.
Yeah.
Just going.
This is just our
Just
friendship.
rolling. Well, regardless, we're at the end, and I hope you enjoyed this little safety consent talk, little lines and veils.
We love to see it.
And
Practicing what we preach and getting it out there in the second episode.
yeah, getting it out there in the second episode. Establish the good rule, and then get into the fucking wacky scenarios and the shenanery.
Yep. All the fun stuff.
All the fun stuff. Well, thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed it, and we hope to see you next time.
Bye.
Bye. Table Talk is a podcast brought to you by Mythos Media Productions, bringing you a new episode every Wednesday wherever you get your podcasts. Find us on Instagram and TikTok at Table Talk RPG, or check us out at our website, mythosmediaproductions.com. All business inquiries can reach out to us via email at info@mythosmediaproductions.com.